Test, test.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. And I hope those of you at home are tuned in. I'm going to just lead off and I'm going to give it to Mr. Cahill. But before I do, I wanted to alert all of you to the Guidance Department website. One of the tabs happens to be college scholarships. And this time of year, I get one every 2-3 days. And I vet it, and then Mr. Fetterbush puts it on this website. And so, as you can see, it just keeps growing and growing. And so those of you in the room that are juniors, keep this on your calendar. We talked a lot about calendar the last couple of weeks, that December, January, February, March is when this particular part of the website is going to grow and grow. Some of them are very specific. Some of them are very general. But as Mr. Cahill is about to go into, there's different sources of money. This is one of them. The website's also a one-stop shopping for everything we talked about this the last couple of weeks. Our timeline is there. All the college forms that we talked about are there. And so go no further than this site. I'd like to introduce Mr. John Cahill. I'm so thrilled to have him back again. He's a wealth of knowledge. And without further ado, Mr. John Cahill.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Frank. That's a remote, right? Okay, excellent. Okay. So I'm speaking into the microphone. Obviously, you don't hear a speaker on. That's for the benefit of the people at home. So if it looks a little odd, now you know why I'm speaking into the microphone. I'm going to do this presentation relatively quickly. We were out here in the fall for the parents of the seniors. This is for the benefit of the juniors and the sophomores. The good thing is you have a little bit of time on your hand. The bad thing is that that time's going to go really, really quickly. I myself have 2 children in college, and just yesterday they were entering kindergarten. It's amazing how quickly it goes. But anyway, thanks for coming. So I'm going to just go quickly through this. This is really the only part where I want people to blurt out something during the presentation. Hold your questions till the end. I believe you should have a notepad, like a scratch paper or something. If you just write down any questions you have until after the presentation. But this is the only one. So tell me, can anybody tell me exactly what it is that we're looking at there up on the screen? College campus. All right, that's pretty generic, but that's the answer I get. More specifically, that's SUNY Geneseo. So this is really going to benefit the parents of the juniors and the sophomores. That's SUNY Geneseo in July. That's what Geneseo looks like now. When I do the presentation in November, I tell the parents that's what it's going to look like in another week or 2. Obviously, this winter's been pretty brutal as far as the cold goes, but the moral of the story really is that when you go and look at colleges in the summertime, that's what you're going to get, especially when you go north. It's a beautiful area, the Finger Lakes region up there. It's great in July and August for the 4 weeks of summer that they have. It's like that a good deal of the time that they're going to be on campus. So the moral of the story is, as parents of sophomores and juniors, if you can go look at schools when they're actually in session as opposed to when you're off, I know it's inconvenient, it's not the most easiest thing to do to get all that time off for both the parents and the students, but it will benefit them greatly. I have a daughter who's down in Mississippi in college. She wanted absolutely no part of this, no part. She had a full scholarship to play softball at the University of Maine, and she said, no thank you, I don't want to be in the cold. So if your son or daughter doesn't like the cold, make sure that you're seeing the schools when they're actually going to be there, because they're going to be miserable if they're in a scenario like that. So I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly tonight, and I'm going to cover some of the myths and misconceptions, some of the costs to school, and some of the processes of what you're going to be looking at as far as how to go about applying for financial aid, and how maybe you can put yourself in a better situation to maybe qualify for more financial aid. The most expensive schools this year are crossing the $100,000 threshold. I just looked the other day, actually, I believe it was yesterday. I was talking with my assistant over there, Elena. Fordham University in the Bronx, not that far away. All in, when you include books and transportation and personal expenses, was $102,000. Their room and board alone was $26,000 to live in the Bronx. $26,000 for 30 weeks a year, mind you. That's not 52 weeks. That's 30 weeks out of the year. It comes out to something like, if you roll it out over the course of an entire year, it's something like $4,000 a month. It's insane. So what do colleges really cost? So there's 4 groupings here that you can look at up here. So your left side is your public 2 years. That would be your Nassau Community Colleges, your Queens, your Suffolk communities, and things along those lines, including other states. So this is not specific to New York State. This is just kind of generic across the country. Your second is your public 4 years. For us, that's obviously your SUNYs and your CUNYs. Then you have your public 4-year out-of-state schools. That would be your UConns, your Penn States, your Michigans, your UCLAs, and so on and so forth. Not your state. And again, this would work if you were in Connecticut, if I was saying SUNYs. And then you have your privates. Okay. Now, you'll notice that those numbers are actually relatively low. The reason being is because on the high side, you have those $100,000 numbers, but there are some schools that are much more reasonable. If you look at schools like, say, for example, Malloy or Adelphi, they're not even close to that $100,000 number. They're not inexpensive, but they're not near that number. So this is taking an average from across the country. To give you an example, my daughter in Mississippi, her room and board for the year is $5,200. Room and board. That's food, that's living, that's everything. Why? Everything's a lot less expensive down there. If I told you what they paid for gas down there, under $2 a gallon. But anyway, that being said, you're looking at a number that's roughly $63,000 versus on the low end, $20,000. And $20,000 is a little high. Most people here don't think of a community school as having dorms, but in other areas of the country, even in New York State, there are some that do. So that's why that number's built in there. 4-year public in-state, that's pretty accurate. New York State SUNY tuition and room and board and fees are rapidly approaching $30,000, if not over, for certain schools. The crazy thing about it is for New York State, you're actually going to pay more for room and board than you will for tuition. Okay? Tuition and fees runs about $10,000. The cost is $30,000. You can figure out the rest. Room and board, anywhere between 15 and 17, depending upon the institution. Again, these numbers are from about 2 years ago. We'll be updating them for the fall. Oh, sorry. What's the breakdown on it? I do apologize. As you can see, the bottom is the tuition and fees. That makes up the biggest portion of that with the privates and the outer states. But if you look at the in-states, you'll notice that the light blue number for housing and food is larger. That's kind of what I was getting at there. Other expenses such as transportation, books, supplies, things like that, those are not billable expenses. Those are not checks that you will write to the institution. Those could be running to Target to get more shampoo. They could be putting a credit card payment for a Delta Airlines flight, like I have done for my daughter in Mississippi many, many times. Something to consider with transportation. But those checks don't get written to the school itself. Okay, so did you know the average cost of a college for 4 years is more than $60,000 per year? Let's look at what they cost and how people paid for them. So here's the breakdown. Now, understand, this is actually a rarity. So I've been doing these presentations for 26 years now. And in the last several years, we've actually seen a little bit of a slowdown in the increases. We used to say that the increases were roughly 5 to 6% per year, but they've actually gone down to an inflation rate of a little over 4%. It's not cheap, but they've actually begun to slow. The problem is that when it's 4% of $100,000, it's still a pretty significant increase for you. So over the last, say, 8 years or so, those increases have begun to slow. They haven't gone down. They're still going up. They're just not going up quite as rapidly as they used to. And again, this chart goes back for about 30 years. You can see, obviously, the privates were the ones that were going up the most, even more so than the publics here. But again, those have started to plane down again a little bit over the last couple of years. How is a family supposed to pay for an education that could potentially cost you upwards of $100,000 a year? I know that's heart attack inducing. Savings, borrow. Well, most people don't have the money set aside to pay for college, at that level at least. If you did, you probably wouldn't be here tonight, which is perfectly fine. The other option is borrowing, and I'm going to go through some of the student loan changes that have come up. They're not in the presentation itself, but I'm going to read through some of them because they're kind of fluid and changing as we go through, but I'll bring them up a little bit later. Scholarships. I know Frank brought up some of the scholarships that are out there. What you're going to find is that most of the scholarships that you get, there are some private source ones that are great resources that they have, but the largest ones that you're probably going to receive are going to come from the institution itself, whether it's going to be some kind of performance-based, whether it's athletics, whether it's academics, whether it's artistic, music, something along those lines. Typically speaking, those are the largest scholarships. The other scholarships that you'll find that are private source, they're great to go after if there's something relatively specific to you. Don't chase crumbs, because you're going to find that most of those are going to be smaller scholarships. But if you have something that's very specific to you that the school provides or maybe an employer provides, they're a great resource to have, but you're going to find that the bulk of them are going to come from the actual colleges themselves. The other option, go to a lesser school or not go at all. Well, go to a lesser school if your son or daughter has been a high academic or a high athletic or some kind of performance, whether it's artistic or whatever, a high achiever. How do you tell them, like, look, it's great. You have 104 weighted average. You did great on your SATs, but we can't afford it, so you're going to go to a school that accepts people with an 85 average. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the point is that they've done very, very well. So how can you work around that? And then not go at all. The standard rule of thumb used to be that college was the $1 million gift, meaning that your average earning over a lifetime for somebody that had a 4-year degree versus a high school degree was $1 million. That spread has started to grow a little bit more than that. We'll see where AI leads with that, because the people that don't have the degrees, that are the plumbers and the electricians, they might still have jobs that AI replaces in 20 years. But that being said, not go at all typically is not the option for most people unless they're in one of those trades, which again is perfectly fine. How do students pay for school? So this is kind of a breakdown of where the money comes from to pay for school that would be the grants. This is not checks that are written by the families, but that over the course of an entire year, the average student, this is not everybody, mind you, this is the average, the highs, the lows, and everywhere in between, receives roughly about $16,300 in some form of grants, scholarship, or it's actually grants, federal loans, educational tax benefits, or work study. As you can see from that pie chart there, the vast majority of it is going to be grants. Grants are great. They don't need to be repaid. It's free money, okay? If you receive a grant, you never have to repay that. That's why it's good that almost 75% of this is made up of grants. The rest of it would be federal loans. So this number, 16,360, this is the breakdown. About 11,600 is grants, 3,900 is federal loans, and then smaller is the education tax benefits and work study. Just so you know, work study is an on-campus job that pays your son or daughter for working in a research lab or a library. They probably get about 10 hours worth of pay, and they do about 9 hours of homework and 1 hour of actual work. It's not slinging burgers or mopping floors or anything like that. It's designed to be in a studious environment. Unfortunately, not everybody gets one, and they don't always have the jobs that are available. Education tax benefits are not something that you would get from a school, but they could be something that you would benefit on your income tax returns from if you qualify. So who's receiving help? Oddly enough, it's actually quite a few of the people, roughly 82% at public 4 years, and 87% of people actually receive some form of help, whether it's grants or scholarships, to help reduce the tuition. It doesn't mean they're going to cover 87%. It just means that they're receiving some form of help from those schools over the course of time. Okay, so government sources have been cutting their resources to pay for education, and aid from colleges themselves. And this is really more for, I'll say it does list public schools on there, but you can see that the gap here between the light blue and the dark blue is significantly greater. Most of the aid that you're going to get from public schools is going to be state or federal aid. Very little of it actually comes from the institution itself because the institution's funded by the federal and the state governments, okay? Whereas private schools do receive federal and state funding, but a great deal of their money that they have to offer is from their own institutional endowment fund. So the aid that actually comes from that is actually growing from the actual college itself as opposed to the government sources. And you can see since over the last, let's say that spread is probably about 15 or so years, it's been 134% increase at the public level and 95% at the private 4 years. I know the spread looks a little weird, but trust me, the math works out. This is the distressing one, and I think we described this in November. It's kind of a blip, okay? FAFSA completion rate. Now, so the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. That is what every financial aid application starts with. It is with any kind of financial aid file. It starts with the FAFSA. It's the free application for federal student aid. I'm going to say that one more time. Free application for federal student aid. That's the last time I'm going to say the full thing. It's FAFSA from here on out. FAFSA completion is, FAFSA is the federal form, and completion rates have actually fallen over the last several years. And this is as of May 2024. Only 43% of all high school seniors completed the FAFSA. It was down from 51%. The reason I say that was an aberration and hopefully a one-year blip was the FAFSA that was released in 2023-24 was an unmitigated disaster. Anybody have a student already in school? Okay, like in college, okay. If you completed the FAFSA that year, that was one of those years where I like to say that I had a hairline that was a little bit further forward because we were literally pulling our hair out. Not Elena, her hair's too thick to pull out, but we would go through, we would file a FAFSA for somebody or with somebody, and 2 weeks later they would get a message from the Department of Education that said that your FAFSA was not completed. You would sign the FAFSA, you would do everything that it needed to do, and it would say it was not completed. This happened over and over and over and over again. We were going back in, no mistakes were made. It's just that they completely redesigned the system, and when they reinvented the wheel, they made it square. So unfortunately, we think that that kind of turned some people off. They said, it's just too much of a hassle, we're not going to bother doing it anymore. We'll see what the new numbers come out when they come out, probably in July, I think it is, when they'll be released. So hopefully that number goes up, because honestly, it doesn't matter the school that you apply to. Even if it's a private school, if you don't fill out that FAFSA application, you're not getting any aid, even if you were eligible to receive it. Okay, so who is eligible for financial aid? So I'll give you some myths and reality. The first thing that everybody says is my income is too high. Well, the answer is, for what school? If you think of financial aid as being a need, meaning that you qualify for a need, don't you think the need for a $30,000 school is going to be considerably different than it would be for a $100,000 school? The answer is yes. Now, if your income is $10 million, your income's too high. So it's not completely irrelevant to say that. But for most people, again, if your income was $10 million, you're not here tonight. No offense, good luck. That's great for you. But the chances are that income too high is very, very subjective. It depends on the school that you're applying to. So what I would say is don't automatically dismiss the financial aid applications because you think it's too high without getting some kind of confirmation first. Own a home. That's been one that it's, in the past, people always used to think that, oh, I own my own home, I'm not going to get any kind of need-based financial aid. Well, the reality is that 97 to 98% of the schools out there don't even look at your home equity. They don't even ask it on the FAFSA. They don't ask about whether you own, whether you rent, whether you live with other people. It doesn't really matter in that regard. There's another form that we're going to discuss other than the FAFSA that will ask that, but it's only for private schools, and it's very, very rare that the schools count that as against you. Grades are too low. Well, that could prevent your son or daughter from getting into the school of their choice, but it will not prevent them from getting financial aid, especially federal and state. It can prevent them from keeping financial aid, but it won't prevent them from getting it. If you, like, let's say, for example, if you get into school and you bomb out, well, the state and the federal government can withdraw financial aid, future financial aid for that, but it won't prevent them from getting it at first. Grades are a whole different story about getting into school, though. Aid is only for special groups. Nope, it's for everybody. Everybody that qualifies, you get it. There's no special groups that get more than others. It's an easy process. Well, the FAFSA has become increasingly less difficult over the years, although a couple of years ago, again, that was an absolute horror show. But the private schools use an additional form that's significantly more difficult, and we'll go through that a little bit more in there. And then school people can help. This is not the high school. I don't mean to, Frank and the guidance department do a great job here, absolutely. Some of the schools that we deal with, that we do the presentations at, not so much, and others are really good. So it depends on the school that you're at. What we're talking about really is the colleges themselves. Oftentimes you'll find, I use the joke often, did anybody know that you can go to the IRS and have your taxes done for free? Would anybody do that? No. Why not? It's free. Chances are you're probably not going to get the best, deductions and exemptions and tax loophole advice from the people who are trying to extract as much money from you as humanly possible. The schools are the same way. The other problem is not only that, they don't know how the financial aid works at other institutions. You could have Hofstra, for example, and they know how the FAFSA works and they know how the financial aid works at Hofstra University, but they don't know how it works at Columbia University because they use a completely different set of forms. Okay? So can they help? To a limited degree. How much aid is available? There's close to $400 billion of aid and tax relief available if you know where to get it. Of that, it's a pie chart here that says roughly $282 billion is student aid, and then $118 billion would be a combination student and parent. That would be more on the tax relief and loan side. Okay, how do they determine if you're eligible for financial aid? So this is something that you're going to want to, this is something how they'll determine when your son or daughter's applying to school, that you'll know, hey, how much is it possibly going to cost me? So there's a simple formula. COA minus SAI equals need. What does that mean? COA is cost of attendance, tuition, fees, room and board. It is not the additional things that I spoke of before, okay? Tuition, fees, room and board, billable expenses to the school itself, okay? That's your cost of attendance at the school. The other stuff is ancillary, and it's going to be different for each person. SAI stands for Student Aid Index. If anybody's had a student in school for a number of years, they used to be called the Expected Family Contribution, of the EFC. That was replaced with Student Aid Index a couple of years ago. It's virtually the same thing. They just decided to do something and make it seem like they were helping, and they just changed the name of it, okay? Student Aid Index is based upon, oversimplification here, but it's based on the parents' and students' income and assets and number of family members. Again, that's a real oversimplification, but that's how they determine it. They put all those numbers into a hopper, and it spits out a number called a Student Aid Index after crunching the numbers through a formula. So if you take your cost of attendance of a school, let's say the cost of attendance at that school is $70,000 and your student aid index is $30,000, that means that you have a $40,000 need. If it's the other way around and your cost of attendance is $30,000 and your student aid index is $70,000, you have no need for financial aid, okay? Need is how much aid you're eligible to receive. Eligible is the key word there. It doesn't mean that's how much you're going to get. It means how much you're eligible to receive. Okay, so where are your biggest sources for financial aid? So you have, the federal government is one. Normally for people on the lower end of the earning scale, but there are federal Pell Grants, do not need to be repaid. okay? They're just about $8,000, and it's a sliding scale up to $8,000. You can qualify for $1,000, you can qualify for $5,000, or you can qualify for up to $8,000. It's just a tick under that, so we'll go with that number for now. Once you go above a certain income threshold, those can disappear. There's also an SEOG grant, which is Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Again, another federal grant that does not need to be repaid. College Work Study, I covered it before. That comes directly from the federal government, supplies it to the college. The college then supplies your son or daughter with that job. Subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans and Parent Plus loans. Those are from the federal government. Those are governmental loans. They are not private loans. So a subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loan, those are loans that are in your son or daughter's name only. They're never in your name as a parent. They do not need to pass a credit check, and they will not be denied that kind of a loan unless they were ever under another federal loan that maybe they were a returning student and they had been in default on that student loan. That's the only way that they would be denied. Those rates are fixed for the life of the loan, however long they have that, and you have to reapply every single year to get a new loan, and that rate will be different for that loan every single year. So if your son or daughter's in school for 4 years, chances are when they graduate, they'll probably have 8 different loans with 4 different interest rates. So what's the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized? A subsidized loan means that the government is picking up the interest tab while your son or daughter's in school, okay? So if the interest rate is 6%, it's really 0% while they're in school, and it does not backload the interest. So if you graduate, 6 months later, you go to start repaying your loans, you still will have 0 interest on that loan. Only at that time will the interest rate kick in and start ticking. The unsubsidized means that the government is not picking up the interest and the interest is accumulating. So if you have a loan for $5,000 and you have an interest rate of 6%, it's going to be $5,000 plus the 6% for however long that you had that loan out, and it will accumulate. Okay, that's the basic difference between the two. Subsidized is obviously the better option. Who else wouldn't take an interest-free loan? Even if you had the money in your pocket, you take the money, let it keep earning money in the bank, keep earning interest in the bank, and then pay it off at the end of the term. The unsubsidized, on the other hand, will continue to roll interest in. Parent Plus loan. Plus is an acronym. It's a little redundancy here because two of the words in the acronym are actually up there. But Parent Plus loans, parental loan to undergraduate student. That's what that means. That is a federal loan. So for those of you that already have children in school, you may have heard this term before. This is the one that's changing radically starting for the 26-27 school year. Prior to this year, if you were credit eligible, meaning that you had a 650 credit score or better and no negative chargebacks on your report, the Department of Education and the lenders would allow you to borrow up to the cost of education, regardless if that cost was $10,000, $20,000, $40,000, or $80,000. They would let you borrow up to the cost of education for that school. Unfortunately, the interest rates are pretty high on that. There is a credit check, but again, you have to have mediocre credit or better. And if you have an 850 credit score or a 650 credit score, you're getting the same interest rate. It does not matter. So basically, they're kind of lumping everybody in together, and because of that, the rate is higher. Currently, those rates are around 9%, which is pretty high. So over the last, say, year or so, Elena and I have started to get some calls from people that had borrowed Plus loans for their children. We had one person recently who had $400,000 in Plus loans for their children combined. They were 60 years old, and they were wondering how they were going to have to start now paying these loans back to the tune of about $3,000 plus a month for the next 25 years at 60. They were going to be 85 and still paying for their kids' education. So what's changed in this? So just let me back up. Subsidized and unsubsidized loans, you're eligible to borrow $5,500 total as a freshman. It goes up to $6,500 as a sophomore, and then it's $7,500 each year as a junior and a senior. Of that, there's a breakdown. If you qualify, the subsidized loan maximum for a freshman is $3,500. So in that case, you would get $3,500 subsidized, $2,000 unsubsidized. And then that $2,000 stays the same as you go through. So $35,000, $2,000, $45,000, $2,000, $55,000, $2,000. If you don't qualify, based on need, the number would be that $5,500, and it would all be unsubsidized. And again, it can be sliding scale in between. That's not changing at all. Those rules have not changed. However, the Parent Plus loans have. So while you used to be able to borrow the full amount to pay for education, now you're limited to $20,000 per student per year with an aggregate max of $65,000. Now, the confusion that we had when we did this in November is they hadn't spelled out exactly how those rules were going to work out, whether it was going to be, could each parent do that? And the answer is no. It's an aggregate for the student. So even if both parents apply for it, you can't exceed that $20,000 in 1 year, and you can't exceed $65,000 total for that student over the life of the loan. So what's that going to do? It's going to force more people into the private student loan market as opposed to the public student loan market. Some people think it's a good idea. Some will take some will say it's a bad idea. Honestly, most of the people are going to blame it. It's going to be political. They're going to think it's one way or the other. Taking a completely apolitical tact on this, here's what I will say is that my hope is that comes out of this. You saw the cost of those colleges. One of the reasons those colleges have been able to get as expensive as they are is because they've had access to relatively easy money from families. The problem is with the colleges often don't really care where the funding comes from as long as they get paid. Once you pay them, it's really not their responsibility as to who pays those loans back, because then it gets passed on to the lender, whether it's a private lender or the federal government lender. So unfortunately, with easy access to money, what it has done is it allowed them to raise the prices. And that's been the case for 80 plus years now. The GI Bill is actually where colleges really started to go out of control. Fantastic for the guys coming home from World War II, but unfortunately bad for the people who didn't get the benefit from that. But the PLUS loans are going to be, they're drastically changing, and there's going to be some other changes to graduate loans as well. If anybody wants to discuss them after the fact, I'll stay and answer any questions. I didn't get a chance to incorporate it in because they're really, these things are very fluid right now. So next source, state government. So in New York State, we have several different programs that are available to residents. Some of them are need-based, some of them are grade-based, okay? So New York State has what's called the Tuition Assistance Program, or TAP. You've probably heard of that. TAP is a grant program that provides up to $5,000 of grant money to any school in the state. Does not need to be a state school, just has to be in the state itself. And you have to have $125,000 or lower of state taxable income to qualify. If you're at $124,999, you'll qualify, but you'll probably get about $250. Obviously, the lower the income gets, the more the money goes up, okay? And that is one of those things I mentioned before about grades not impacting it. That's one area where grades can impact it. If the students don't maintain what they call satisfactory academic progress, they can yank your TAP. And it's only good for 8 semesters. So if your son or daughter's on a 5-year plan and they qualify for a full TAP, they're only going to get it for the first 4 years. So chop, chop. Get done with school. Don't take too much time. New York State STEM incentive program. This one's grade-based. So if you're in the top 10% of your high school graduating class and you're going for a science, technology, engineering, or math degree, and you're going to either a SUNY or a CUNY school, they will cover up to the full cost of tuition at that school. It does not cover room and board, but it does cover the full tuition and fees. That's a pretty big thing. However, it's relatively limited. You have to be in the top 10% of your class and going for a STEM degree. There's also a stipulation on the back end that you have to stay in the state for as long as you receive the award. So if you receive it for 4 years and you stay in New York State for 4 years, you're free and clear. If you leave after 2 years, you have to repay those 2 years that you didn't stay, okay? 2, 3, whatever the number might be. The next 2 awards are related. One at the top one, Excelsior Scholarship, is for state SUNY and CUNYs. Enhanced is for privates. The Excelsior Scholarship is $125,000 or lower of federal adjusted gross income, okay? Federal adjusted, the other one was state. But $125,000 or lower of federal adjusted gross income, and you can qualify for the Excelsior Scholarship, which covers tuition at a SUNY or a CUNY. It doesn't cover fees, it covers tuition only, okay? So if you qualify, fantastic. As long as you go to a SUNY or a CUNY, you're good to go. You can lose it, obviously, if your income goes up. We had a family that lost it this year, I think, because of $300 of income. Their income went up $300, and that $300 difference was the difference. We were like at $124,900, and they were like 125.2 for 2024. It happens. Unfortunately, there was nothing that we could do at this point in time. But again, it's good for the same 4 years, and it has similar stipulations on the back end to the STEM scholarship. You have to stay in the state. I believe for the Excelsior, I believe it's 5 years. But again, same stipulations. The enhanced tuition award is the private school version of that. The difference is that not every school in the state provides it. If it's the Excelsior scholarship, it doesn't matter what SUNY school or what CUNY school you go to, they have to provide it. As far as the enhanced tuition award, it's relatively limited. Last year, I believe there were about 35 schools that offered it. So if you went to Malloy, they didn't. Adelphi did. St. John's didn't. So again, it's up to the individual school because it's partially funded by the state and partially funded by the institution itself. So if you're looking for the enhanced tuition award, pay attention. There is a list that's published every single year, and it changes every single year. So we hang a new one up every single year to see which ones that drop on and drop off. Honestly, one of the reasons they drop off is because there's not a lot of participation in it. Many more people take advantage of the Excelsior Scholarship just because it's more widely known, and it's easier to get. So next would be the colleges and universities. Again, this is really important. Colleges and universities typically provide the most money that you're going to receive, especially at the private level. Those endowment funds outside of the federal and state funds, they can be enormous. I mean, I'm going to use an exaggerated case here, or an example, but Harvard has the largest endowment fund in the country of over $50 billion. That's B. That's billion with a B, okay? They could get away with not charging tuition, fees, or room and board for every student for perpetuity and still barely dent their endowment fund. Now, that endowment fund obviously gets used for other things. It's not just for financial aid. But the point is that that's where that money comes from. So the larger the school's endowment fund, the more money that they have to give, okay? Also, from the colleges and universities, it is often awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. They can actually run out of money on the grant side. Federal and state typically don't, but the colleges themselves can. And they give preferential packaging to students who are in the top 25% of applicants. Normally not on the grant side, but that's more on the scholarship side. Basically, think of yourself as being the big fish in a little pond. You're going to be much more eligible to receive those kind of awards from those schools. Okay, lastly, this is the private sources I kind of spoke about before. Are private scholarship services worth it? Now, I'm talking about ones that charge. There are scholarship services out there that will charge you $2,500 to $4,500 to find scholarships for your sons and daughters. It's not worth it. It really isn't. There's apps that you can download on your phone. One used to be called Scholly or something like that. They'll actually find scholarships that you might be eligible to receive that are outside of what the school might have. For example, my oldest daughter, was a Gold Award recipient for the Girl Scouts, so they had several scholarships available. She also received a community softball award from a local organization that gave out a $1,000 scholarship every single year. Again, she was matched to that scholarship. If you're a member of a fraternal order or a union, Hibernians, or whatever it might be, you might have a scholarship available that's going to be a much more limited pool of people that can apply for it. Those are absolutely worth it. But paying $2,500 to $4,000 to find a scholarship, probably not going to be worth it. Because at the end of the day, they provide about 2% of all the aid that's available. That's private source scholarships outside of the colleges and those unions and so on and so forth. Here's the last kicker on that. It doesn't even say it up here, but I'll kind of go over it quickly. If you receive an outside source scholarship, so let's say your son or daughter applies to a school and you get an academic scholarship and maybe you get a grant, the school's determined that that's the amount that you're going to get. That's great. And you apply for a scholarship for local 3 electricians, and they have a scholarship that gives $5,000. Oftentimes, schools don't allow for stacking of scholarships. And what that means is that they have already determined that you've got enough, or you've gotten the most that you're eligible to receive. So now you get that $5,000 scholarship. You're like, great, my bill's going to go down. Well, with a scholarship of that size, typically speaking, that's going to have to be made payable to the school itself, to the institution. When the school finds out about it, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll reduce one of their awards to keep the number the same. What? Yeah, it happens. It's called stacking, and they don't always allow it to happen. Some schools will look the other way. If it's $1,000 or less, maybe $1,500 or less, oftentimes the scholarship payment will be made payable to the student. In that case, just don't tell them about it. use that money to buy a laptop or something like, or supplies, or heck, you'd be shocked at how much you spend on betting for your son or daughter. It's insane. Those Walmart and Target runs get really expensive in August, let me tell you. So really, don't spend your time looking for crumbs for those outside ones unless it's something that's real specific for you, or it's an easy process. I told the story last time. I had a student about 15 years ago who applied for a Wendy's scholarship. Yes, like Wendy's, the fast food joint. And everybody that applied got a free Frosty. It's great. And he was determined, so he wanted to keep going and see how far it went. He went through 4 levels, and every level that he got up to, like I think the 4th level that he won was like a $25 gift certificate. So he's like, great. He's like, I'm going to take my date to Wendy's. That's great, right? After that, I think like the 5th level, it actually became monetary, and they had something like 5 $10,000 scholarships for the entire country. Now, hey, if you got that $10,000 scholarship, that was fantastic. But I think you had to go to like 12 different levels to get to that. That's a lot of Frosties to eat. You wind up getting a little wide around the hips if you keep doing that. And it gets expensive. You spend all that money there. Okay, so how are you going to apply? For those of you that have never gone through this process I said before, the FAFSA is where everything starts. Every school requires the FAFSA, even if it's only to get federal student loans. You cannot get any kind of loans without applying for with the FAFSA. 60% can go in with errors and or inconsistencies. Now, the FAFSA has become a little bit more streamlined, and it's eliminated some of those. The number used to actually be higher. The good news is that most of the information, as long as you get your name, your date of birth, your social security number, and your address correct, it's going to import your information from the IRS, and it's going to let you not make a mistake on that part. So those errors and inconsistencies have been removed, but there's assets. People make mistakes with what's listed as an asset, or maybe they list the family members wrong or something like that. And if you make a mistake, it can cost you. Everyone has to fill one out to get aid. It doesn't matter, even if, as I said before, even if you're not going to qualify for need-based financial aid, or you're not going to qualify for federal aid, maybe you're going to qualify for institutional aid, they still require the FAFSA form to be filled out, or you can't get that. You can't apply for federal student loans if you don't fill one out. That goes for the parents too, okay? So if it is done wrong, it usually gets bumped, adding another, say, 3 to 4 weeks of processing. That's at the busy time. The slower times of year, it does process a little bit quicker than that. That can result in lost financial aid. Okay, so how do you apply for the FAFSA? Pretty simple, well, not simple, but FAFSA is applied for using studentaid.gov. That's the website. So if you want to write that down, that's great. That's fantastic. Studentaid.gov is your federal catch-all for the FAFSA, for student loans, for consolidations and things like that. All going to be done through that studentaid.gov website, all right? You're going to have to create what's called an FSA ID for your student and for one parent. So if you're married, only one parent needs an FSA ID. There are a couple of circumstances where your second parent might need one, but typically speaking, an FSA is federal student aid. That's all it means. FSA ID. It's specific to your name, date of birth, social security, but it's also tied to your cell phone and to your email address. So if you create one for your daughter, and then you go to create one for yourself, and you try to use the same email address, it'll kick it out. Okay, so it's uniquely tied to that cell phone and that email, because they're going to use dual-factor authentication every time you create one or you do something with it. Again, one student, one parent. He needs one. Okay. Now, this is the complex one. This is where it gets a little bit more hairy. So everything I've spoken about so far has been mostly federal, as far as the applications go. However, there's an additional form that's required by about 450 schools across the country, and that number has actually grown over the last couple of years. And you might ask, well, why would that number grow? Well, FAFSA 2024, that's why, because it was such a mess. Schools that used to use the profile and dropped it started adding it back in because it was so unreliable. That being said, roughly about 450 schools, about 99% of them are privates. There are a few exceptions. UNC Chapel Hill, for argument's sake. University of Michigan, there's a few outliers, but none of the state schools in New York or New Jersey, Pennsylvania, any of those require the CSS. However, the CSS profile, it's going to ask a lot more detail. I like to refer to it as a virtual financial colonoscopy, okay? And the reason being is because they're going to want to know everything about your finances. They're going to ask about your home equity. They're going to ask about a business if you own one, detailed explanations of income. let's see, assets, expenses. It also has to be consistent with the FAFSA. If you change one little thing on there, so for example, the FAFSA is going to ask you a question about your checking and savings. So let's say, for example, you do the FAFSA one day and you do the CSS profile the next day, and you put it $50 different. You're going to get a form, an asset verification form that says, why were these two numbers different? It could be $1, and you'll still get questioned on it. The main difference between the FAFSA and the CSS profile, other than the fact that it asks a lot more questions about your finances, does not allow for IRS syncing. So what does that mean? So the IRS is going to allow your tax returns to get imported into the FAFSA form so that you kind of can't mess up the income piece of it. As long as you file taxes, it's going to do that in 99% of the circumstances, and it smooths out the process. The profile has no such sync. What does that mean? That means that when you fill out that CSS profile, you have to have your complete tax return with you in front of you, and you have to enter the numbers manually. Now, it can be pretty confusing, especially if you're not financially savvy, or maybe you have an accountant that does the tax return for you, and you take that tax return when you get it and you go like this and you put it in a drawer and you never look at it again. So you might not know what they're looking at. Does it have instructions? Yes, but people still make tons of mistakes when it comes to that. Typically speaking, a CSS profile is probably about, when you complete it, anywhere between, say, 16 and 19 pages of printout of information that they're going to ask for. And they're going to ask for a lot more detail about what you put on the FAFSA. It's going to be significantly greater. It's not easy to understand and fill out. It can be significantly much more difficult, especially if you own a business or maybe there's a divorce or something like that. At collegeboard.org. So if your son or daughter has taken an SAT or a PSAT, chances are they've already registered with College Board. The same company that runs the SATs runs the CSS profile. So if they have a username and password, it's good. It's actually an email and a password, but if they have an email and a password, that's the same website. Once you go in there again, there'll be a sub-menu. It'll say SATs, it'll say school search, and then in one will be the CSS profile. If you try to fill it out now, it's not going to work for you because it's only for seniors and kids that are already in college. Okay, schools have their own, now they only take their own form. And guess what? It's got the same exact information that is required on the CSS profile. It's very redundant. However, you still have to fill it out or you don't get it. They have to be consistent, again, and they're going to ask the same questions. Okay, so the IRS data retrieval tool, tax transcript, IDOC, these are a couple of different things that are going to go through the process of both the federal and the institutional applications. The IRS data retrieval tool is for the FAFSA only. That ports your tax information over to the FAFSA. Tax transcript could be maybe if there was something that they didn't quite understand in that they could ask for a copy of a tax transcript. Public schools don't ever ask for copies of your actual tax return. It is exceedingly rare that they do that. What they would ask for is for a copy of a tax transcript. For those of you that are old enough to know the term, a tax transcript is the Cliff Notes version of your federal tax return. It condenses what might be this thick down to like 2 pages. Lastly is IDOC, okay? IDOC, if you look it up on Google, just understand that the first thing that's probably going to come up is the Illinois Department of Corrections. That's not what you want, okay? IDOC is College Board's way of getting your tax return information to the schools. So not only do you have to fill it out on the form, if you have College Board, if you have a school that uses the CSS profile, chances are they're going to ask for physical copies of your tax return. IDOC is a centralized unit that allows you to send it to multiple schools at once. Not every school uses it, though, just so you understand. So just because a school uses the CSS profile doesn't mean they use IDOC. You might have to send it to them separately. If you apply to 10 schools that use the CSS profile, I would venture a guess to say between 6 and 7 of them would use IDOC. The others, unfortunately, don't. You have to send it to them separately. There are additional forms that could potentially be that needed. These are both through the College Board, through the CSS profile. One is the Business and Farm Supplement. Again, I say this all the time, 27 years, I've never had anybody fill out a farm supplement on Long Island. It is what it is, okay? But a business, if you own a business, they're going to ask about your business on the CSS profile, and then they're going to make you fill out a separate form that's best done with your accountant. And the reason being is it goes through a lot of profit and loss for last year, for this year, and your projected next year. It's pretty complex. It's not for the lighthearted. Then you could potentially need to fill out divorced or separated agreement, or what's called a non-custodial profile. So if you have parents that are divorced and applying to a private school that uses the CSS, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll ask for what's called a standard CSS profile, which is for the parent. That's called the custodial parent. That's who they live with, okay? And then there's the non-custodial profile. That's for the parent that they do not live with. They have to fill out the same form over again, but using their information. Just so you know, in case you are divorced, don't worry. They cannot access, one parent cannot access the other's information. There is a separation, there is a wall between it that you cannot see. If you want to share it, that's entirely up to you, but you would not be able to see what your ex-husband or your ex-wife put down on their form. If you do not fill out that non-custodial profile and the schools ask for it, the schools can say, well, thank you very much, but you get nothing, okay? If you have a situation where the parent is belligerent, the non-custodial parent is belligerent, or maybe there's no relationship, or they don't know where they are, or whatever it would be, oftentimes a waiver can be obtained. Somebody like Frank over there, he can do that for you in the form of a letter, or a clergy, or somebody from the court, or a divorce attorney, or something like that. But if it's just one parent that just doesn't want to participate, I don't feel like giving my financials, just understand that your son or daughter is not going to get financial aid because that parent doesn't want to participate. So they have to do it if they want to get aid. Okay, so which colleges give you the best shot at giving money? So this is quick. This is for you, and this is really important, especially for parents of sophomores and juniors. You want to know this information before you apply because, well, we'll get to that. Percentage of need met. Some schools meet 100% of a need. What does that mean? I've said before, cost of attendance minus student aid index equals need. So if a school meets 100% of a need, the cost of the school is $80,000, and your student aid index is $20,000. You have a $60,000 need. If it's 100%, they're going to give you that full $60,000, and they're going to reduce your tuition and your fees and your bill by that amount. Others only meet, say, 30 to 50%. That's a big drop-off. That $80,000 school, they're only meeting 50% of your need, and your need is $60,000. They're only meeting 30 of that need. That means you get your student aid index of 20 plus the unmet need, which could put you at $50,000 for a school when another school might only charge you $20,000, even though the cost is the same, okay? The reason you want to know that beforehand is because, well, if your son or daughter falls in love with a school that you have no hope of affording, it's like trying to put the genie back in the bottle or the tube or the toothpaste back in the tube. I've had students, unfortunately, over the years where the parents did wait, and they told the children that they'd make it work, they'd figure out a way, and then when they get the bill in April that they have to pay, or what their final, not the bill, but what their final number is going to be, and they have to make a decision by May 1st, and they look at it and they go, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Now try and back out of that with your, oh no, don't worry about it. They've already bought the sweatshirt, they got the bumper sticker on the car, decorated the rooms, whatever it would be. I had one student literally sit in front of me, I kid you not, back in 2012, I think it was. Daughter wanted to go to Sacred Heart University to become a physical therapist, and parents did exactly what I said. We'll figure it out. And then when they got that it wasn't a bill, it was their final award, they realized that they couldn't do it. First off, she was the oldest of 3, so they had 2 other children coming up the pike, and they just didn't have the money saved. And when they looked at it, they said, we can't do this. And the mom, the daughter, and the dad were sitting right in front of me in my office, and all of a sudden, the waterworks started. She started crying, bawling her eyes out, and literally stomping her feet on the ground, going, but you told me I could go. It was one of the more embarrassing moments I've ever had in my career. It was not easy on them. It really wasn't. Unfortunately for them, the mom wound up caving, and they sent her there. She didn't complete the degree, and then they didn't have money left over for the youngest. It was a really tragic situation, to say the least. But if they had known that beforehand, like they say, if Woody had gone straight to the police, none of this would have happened. If they had known beforehand, they would have been able to prevent that from happening. Okay, so percentage of need met, percentage of gift aid, percentage of self-help, these are all important things. So percentage of need met, that was the number that we said, 50, 80, 100%. Percentage of gift aid versus self-help. Well, gift aid means that you don't have to repay it. That could be grants, that could be scholarships. It could be also those federally subsidized loans. Remember, that's interest-free while they're in school. That's considered gift aid, okay? You don't need to pay that back. If a school has a high percentage of need met and a high percentage of gift aid, that's great. That means it's going to cost you less money. If it's self-help, what does self-help mean? Well, self-help are student loans that need to be repaid and the interest is accumulating. It could be work study. Again, work study is great to have. It doesn't reduce your tuition. It just reduces the amount of money that you have to send them on a monthly basis. Because I'm going to tell you right now, you will become an ATM machine for your sons and daughters when they're away at college. Venmo is my friend. Well, actually, it's my enemy right now with my kids. But the point is that self-help, it means it has to be repaid. It's not free in that regard. You don't want to find out when the time comes in, say, April, May, or June, that the aid that you thought that you were getting has to be repaid. You didn't realize it had to be repaid. Now all of a sudden you go, oh my God, I thought we were getting gift aid. You're not. Okay, you need to know these things before you apply. Okay. So this is a quick case study I'm going to just show. This is not specific to any one school. It used to be years ago, but it got too confusing for people. So School A and School B, pretty simple. School A is a private school. School B is a public school. $60,000 versus $25,000 cost of attendance. A student aid index, exactly the same, 10,000 and 10,000. Same family, doesn't matter. Okay. Need on the left side is 50. The need on the right side is 15,000. School A meets 100% of aid. 100% of a need, with 90% of that being gift aid, 10% being self-help. School B only meets 60%, so that leaves you $6,000 short of your aid, and only 50% is gift aid, 50% was self-help. So what would you actually pay at a school like that? You might think, oh, God, well, it's $60,000. It's going to cost us more than the $25,000 school. The truth of the matter is, your total family contribution, which is when that comes out of your pocket, is $10,000. So you got gift aid, you got self-help, it adds up, you got $60,000, okay? Your total out of pocket is $10,000, and then obviously the self-help needs to be repaid. School B, much lower starting point, but because there's much lower percentage of need met, you have an unmet need of $6,000, you have a total family contribution of $16,000, okay? Because your student aid index is always going to need to be paid. You got $10,000 plus the 6, you got $16,000 family contribution right out the door at that, and because only $4,500 of that is gift aid, it's even more so. So schools B and School A, even though the cost is higher on the left, the end result of applying for financial aid correctly and knowing the schools that are more generous is that even though those schools have a much higher sticker price, they're much less expensive. I'll use a very quick example. Anybody bought a car in the last couple of years, like a new car? Nobody. Okay, a couple of nuts. All right. You go into the dealership, you look at that sticker and you go, I'll take it. Like, nobody does that. They walk in, they negotiate, they look for discounts. So what I would always tell people is that you're not actually going to pay what that says right on that sticker. The same goes for the colleges. Don't focus on this number. Don't focus on this, on the cost of attendance. Focus on the net number. What is the actual family contribution going to be? And oftentimes you'll see the schools that are more expensive can wind up being less expensive than schools that are sticker priced lower. Okay. Also, this is not as important for you right now, but you will know that I'm just going to cover it briefly. You can negotiate financial aid packages. Much like you can negotiate the cost of a car, you can also negotiate for a financial aid package. If there's something that's changed, for example, this year's seniors, the parents and the students' tax returns that they're using are the 2024 taxes. Well, we're in 2026 already. I mean, crazy to think, right? 2 years ago, things might have been different. Maybe you retired. Maybe you changed jobs. Unfortunately, the FAFSA and the CSS profile don't take that into account. So you can negotiate that if things have changed for the worse. If they've changed for the better, I would advise you not to negotiate because it's not going to help you in that case. But you can negotiate much like you could with a car. Some schools misaward. Some schools underaward. I've seen this happen, especially when you have multiple students in school. The FAFSA form has changed. They used to divide what was called that expected family contribution by the number that you had in school. They don't do that anymore, okay? So that has changed. They give you credits for it. It's a little bit different, so they still do give you some help. But the individual schools themselves can still do that. They will underaward, though. Oftentimes, I had a student years ago, parent had 3 students, 3 in school, and 1 was in Boston College, 2 were in Fordham. This is like 20 years ago, so it was a lot less expensive then. The Fordham didn't recognize that the daughter was she had 2 brothers, that they actually had a student in school already at Fordham. Like they didn't account for that. It wasn't Boston College. It was Fordham didn't recognize that they already had another student in school. Oh, really? Oh, we didn't know that. Okay. And then they changed their financial aid award accordingly. Some schools will also try and compete. This kind of falls into the negotiation tool. Hofstra and St. John's, Adelphi, Malloy, they all kind of float in the same universe. Geographically and academically, they're pretty similar, and they kind of attract the same students. If you get a better award from St. John's, but you really want to go to, say, Adelphi, take that award from St. John's to Adelphi and say, look, I got a better offer from them. Can you match it, or can you beat it? Not always going to do it, but oftentimes they will. That always helps, as long as they're in the same orbit. It would be difficult to take an award, like if you got a great award from Adelphi and you didn't get a great award from Columbia, Columbia would say, sorry, they're not on the same level as us, okay? So I'm going to go into quickly about assets, about how you could potentially save money. So when financial aid asks about assets, they're going to ask about your checking, your savings, your investments, okay? Very simply put. Those are what's called your assessable assets. So it's money that you can liquidate and get to very quickly. So that would be your checking, your savings, and your investments that are not retirement-based, okay? The schools will also ask about any kind of vacation homes that you have or rentals and things like that. Those are considered assessable assets. Non-assessable assets, these are things that they won't ask about, okay? Especially on the FAFSA. They won't ask about your home equity. Never ask. The question doesn't even come up. They won't ask about your retirement plans, your 401ks, your 403bs, 457s, IRAs, things like that. They do not ask about that. Cash value of life insurance, again, don't ask. Annuities, don't ask. Businesses with greater than 100 employees, fewer than 100 employees, they're not going to ask about that. Those are your non-assessable assets. Now, just for the record, the CSS profile, on the other hand, can potentially ask about every single thing on there. Does it mean it's going to hurt you? Home equity, there are a few schools that do count home equity, but they're very, very rare. Probably about, if only 450 schools use the CSS profile, I would say fewer than 30 assess home equity. So it's not a lot. You just don't want that to be the school that your son or daughter applies to. Retirement plans, they're going to ask about it. They're going to ask about what your IRAs and your 401ks are worth. But they can't hold it against you, okay? Don't worry about that. So there's no way of knowing. They wouldn't really know. As long as you weren't taking money out of that, they would have no idea that it actually existed. But if it's not in one of these things, if it's a money that you have in a stock or a brokerage account or something like that, that's going to be an assessable asset, and it will show up on your tax return, and they will know about it from your interest and your dividends. So if you say that you have no money and you have an interest and dividend statement that shows that you do, you're going to get flagged, and they're going to ask you where that money is. Okay, ownership of assets, this one's kind of important here. So custodial accounts, they've become not exceedingly, but they've become much more rare in the last several years because of the implements of 529 plans. But a custodial account would be an account that you opened up for your son or daughter, where you're basically the custodian until they reach the age of majority, and New York State is 21. You kind of control it with them. Even though you're the custodian on it, it's their money. It is literally their money. Versus parent, which is in your name. So a custodial account, an account that's in you as the custodian and the child as the owner, is assessed at 20%. What does that mean? It means if you have $20,000 in a custodial account, 20% of that, it causes a 20% loss in financial aid. It raises your student aid index by 20%. So you just lost $4,000 in aid by doing the right thing and saving for them. If it was in your name, the parent's name, it's 5.6%, okay? Much lower assessment rate, $1,120. Huge difference, parent asset versus student asset. That's a big difference. It used to be 35%. They lowered it from 35 a number of years ago to 20%. 529 plans, most 529 plans are treated as an asset of the parent if you choose to list it on the financial aid applications, okay? It's normally listed as an asset of the parent because the student's listed as a beneficiary, and you can change that beneficiary. So if you have multiple students and your oldest gets a great scholarship or chooses not to go to school, you can change the beneficiary to a younger child. That's why it's always yours. If it's grandparent-owned, it doesn't exist. Literally, it does not exist. It's a nice rule change they made about that. Okay, so what did we learn tonight? A ton of misleading and incorrect information about college funding. There's literally billions of dollars available through various government and private grants, scholarships, loans, and work-study programs. The FAFSA forms are often filled out incorrectly, and the CSS is even worse, okay? So most public schools use only the FAFSA. Private schools use that CSS profile and additional forms. Elaine, I said it before, Princeton uses their own form now, right? They're not using, yeah, they stopped using their own, okay? Financial aid is dished out on a first-come, first-served basis. Once the allotment's gone, it's gone. Typically not for federal and state aid, but that's typically how it works on the private side. Some schools historically provide more aid than others. You want to know that before you go into it, okay? And then just like buying a car, you usually have to haggle to get the best price. I know it sounds crazy, you think about it, but guess what? Colleges are businesses. They want your money bad enough, make them earn it. Okay, so I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Just as you go through this, as someone who has been through this process myself over the last, my oldest daughter is she's a senior in college right now, and my youngest is a sophomore. Don't sweat the small stuff. It comes on fast, and you know, Elena went through this process. Her son is a senior right now in high school. It can be nerve-wracking, and be patient with your children, because as much as you want them to commit to go to a school and you want them to make that decision, it's a big life-altering decision for them. And here's what I will also tell you. Unfortunately, some of them are going to make the wrong decision. It doesn't mean that that's bad or anything like that. Just don't expect it to be perfect the first time. My oldest daughter went to Farmingdale. She had a miserable experience with her softball coach there and decided to transfer down to a school in New Jersey where she is as happy as a clam. It happens, unfortunately. We've even had students, we get at least one a year, that either doesn't make it out of the car at the school itself when they get there in August or September, or they last a week. I have a niece who, I love her to death. She was number 4 in her class in Smithtown West High School a number of years ago, and she lasted at UConn for 3 days. 3 days. And she came home. Hey, it's great, no problem. She graduated from Stony Brook and then went to Hofstra, graduated as a PA about a year ago, so she's doing fantastic. But the point is, it's going to be a lot of stress on them too, not just you. You have to worry about the financial piece of it. They have to worry about the piece of going away. As parents, it's concerning. My daughter in Mississippi had surgery about 2 weeks ago. It's tough not being there for her when I was there for the surgery, but had to go home. Those are the things that we think about as parents, but the kids, they got a lot of choices to make. Oftentimes you'll see them applying if they're going away to school, I'd say 10 to 12 schools. Imagine trying to make that choice. It seems like it was easier when we were younger, but for them, for me, it was easier. My father said, you're going to Suffolk. And I said, but? And he said, there's no buts. So I went to Suffolk, and then I went to Stony Brook. But that doesn't seem to be the case as much as it used to be. Don't fret it, but just understand. Try to be patient with them. It's a tough decision for both parties. But make it in conjunction. So if you know the finances about how these schools are going to work as far as what they're going to cost and what kind of aid they're going to go, it's going to make your job eminently easier to cross those schools off the list now than it will be when they're sitting in front of you going, but you told me I could go. Okay? What questions do you people have? I'm going to stay as long as you need. What questions do you have tonight, folks? Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Oswego, I see, right? Yes. Yeah. So a work-study program is provided by the government to the schools, and it doesn't matter whether it's private or public. It's basically need-based. That doesn't mean she can't get a job on campus. It just means it's probably not going to be, she might be flipping burgers or mopping floors. It's going to be more of a job that she would have down here. But it doesn't matter whether it's private or public. It's treated the same exact way. Yes, sir. Well, yes, they could pay less, but they also may not have the hours available. Like oftentimes, work study is it's over awarded. So just use a round number. They could offer 100 work study jobs and only have 70 jobs available. Or they could say that you qualify for $3,500 in work study, but they might only have $2,200 worth of work for you. So it's a best guess is the best way to put it for a work study program. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. I had a nephew who qualified for work study at SUNY Plattsburgh 2 straight years in a row, and he was too lazy to apply for it. By the time he got done applying to it, the jobs were all gone. And it doesn't come off the bill. So I wouldn't say if you qualify for it, absolutely go for it. But it's again, it's not reducing your bill. We had a student recently who was awarded work study at Cornell, and only child, spoiled rotten, and the parents literally sat there on the phone with Elena and I going, oh, no, don't worry, you don't have to work, you don't have to work, you don't. And I was explaining to them, no, he's going to be like in a library where he's doing homework for 9. No, we don't want him to do that. We don't want him to work. He's going to have a very rude awakening when he gets out of college. But that being said, so anyway, yes. Did that answer your question? Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's a great question. And the answer is it might. So some schools, if they offer an academic scholarship, may require you to still fill out a FAFSA and a CSS profile to get that merit scholarship, even if you have no need. It doesn't matter if your income is $10 million. They may still require it. CSS actually stands for College Scholarship Service. So the answer is potentially. What I would tell you is, and I tell everybody that we meet with, I tell them the same exact thing. If they're not going to qualify for any need-based financial aid, and their son or daughter is going to qualify for a decent amount of merit aid, I would say check with the school, just to be on the safe side. You might say, I don't need to fill it out. Okay, be 100% certain, because you don't want to miss out on a $30,000 scholarship just because you didn't fill it out. My daughter, for argument's sake, I told you, she's on an athletic scholarship down in Mississippi. We pay the room and board only. We had to fill out a FAFSA for $5,200. We didn't take out a loan, but we had to fill it out to get that athletic scholarship. Didn't matter. So what I would say is there's no steadfast rule. Check with the institution, just to be on the safe side. Yes, ma'am, you had it, and then I'll get to you, sir, I promise. No, that's a great question. So the FAFSA becomes, all financial aid applications become available October 1st of your son or daughter's senior year. If you try and fill it out now, it's going to be for the current school year that you're in. The common application opens up for business on August 1st of the summer before that. But the financial aid applications cannot be filed until October 1st. And then understand that there could be deadlines, depending if they're doing early action or early decision. You may have to get them done sooner rather than later. Some are as early as, say, November 1st. Okay? I'll get to you, ma'am. Yes, sir. So, okay. So there's early action and there's early decision. Okay? Just quickly so you know what they are. I'm sure Frank goes through this with you anyway, but early decision, binding, early action, non-binding. Early decision is not really binding. Like they're not going to arrest you if you don't choose not to go there. As long as it's financially, you're financially capable of doing it, you say you're going to go there, you're supposed to pull your other applications to other schools by, let's say, February 15th or whatever it might be. For early action, it just lets you know that you're getting into the school earlier. Both of them do increase your opportunity to get into the school. So, like, for example, like you said, if you dream school, if the regular acceptance rate is 15%, it might be 20% under early action or early decision. As far as whether or not it decreases your chances of getting aid, the answer is supposed to be no, that it's supposed to be treated the same way. And what happens with early action and early decision is that, well, more so for early decision, because you're supposed to pull that application by a certain day. Like early action, there's no commitment date. It's still the same commitment date in most cases. But with early decision, because you have to make a decision much earlier as far as whether or not you're going to go there, they have to get their financial aid information out to you earlier. I've never seen it where somebody who would qualify for aid under regular decision doesn't get it under the early decision realm. Again, so much of it depends on the school, though, and that's really what it boils down to. If a school is notoriously not generous, it doesn't matter whether you're doing early decision or early action. You're not going to get the money anyway. Like, it doesn't matter. But I haven't seen it impact it, for a school that's, like, for example, if you were going to Cornell, for argument's sake, and they're really generous with financial aid, they're not going to cut you out from getting aid because you applied early decision or early action. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to get to everybody. Don't worry, I promise. Mm-hmm. Correct. Mm-hmm. In essence, you'll be doing 4 FAFSAs that way. So, because what happens now is they've separated them. It used to be all one. What happens is you do the student. So you fill out a FAFSA as the student, whether it's a student or whatever. They fill out their portion, and then they kind of invite you to do your portion of it. and then the other student does their portion, and they invite you to do it. Used to be in the old world where you could link the two together. Like you could do the older students first, and they would put your information in, and then you'd say, do you have a younger student? It would say yes, and it would pull all your information over. It stopped doing that. So again, they made it simpler, but they made it more complex at the same time. But you can do them separately. Correct. Yeah. So the parents is good for, you could have 10 children, and it would still be good for that. But each student has to have their own ID. Yes, yes, sir. No, it's not. I mean, honestly, as you can see, I'm a certified financial planner. So I look at people. One of the things when I work with people that need help with the FAFSA, the CSS profile, again, specifically more for the CSS profile because it is so much more detailed than what they ask for. As far as like, can you hide your assets? Well, the answer is yes, but, and there's a big but with that. There's a big caveat when it comes to that. There are a lot of, so the answer is yes, but what it does is it develops other questions underneath that. So I'll give you an example. All right, so let's say you had $500,000 that was just sitting there, and it was an assessable asset, and you were going to lose, let's say, $30,000 in financial aid because of that money. All right, it's close to that number. So say 27, 28,000, right? So you could say, all right, and let's say you had two kids that were going to go to school, and they were 4 years apart. That's like 8 years of school, right? That's a lot of money to cost you over that period of time. And let's say otherwise you would have qualified for financial aid based on your income alone. The first question I would ask would be, can you do it? And the answer would be yes, you can. But there's two questions you have to, or a couple. Is it the right thing for you financially? Like, do you need that money? Because the only way that you can shelter money is to basically lock it up. So either you pay off your house, buy a car, things like that, or shelter it in a tax-sheltered vehicle like an annuity or something like that. And typically speaking, all those things come with strings attached. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that, is it going to cost you a lot of money in taxes if you had, let's say there was a stock. Let's say you bought NVIDIA stock 6 years ago. You bought it for $50,000. Now it's worth $500,000. It's okay, great. You want to shelter it, but the IRS is going to come knocking and they're going to say, well, you're going to owe a significant capital gain on that. Is the capital gain going to be greater than what you're saving? Like the tax going to be greater than what you're saving on that? So the answer is maybe. But you'd have to, so yes, you can, but it's specific to it's specific to each person individually. Like I would never answer that question and say yes, definitively, without knowing more about it. But suffice to say, it's possible. But you need to do your homework on it before you would do that. Okay? Yes, ma'am. So if a 529 plan is used correctly, there's no tax on it. So a 529 plan is a tax-deferred vehicle. The money goes in, you can get a state tax deduction on the contributions, no federal tax, but you get a state tax deduction of up to $10,000 per year. So it'll save you like, say, $700 or so on your taxes. It grows tax deferred, and if it's used correctly for college purposes, for tuition, room and board fees, things like that, it is tax-free. The growth is tax-free. The principal always comes back to you tax-free. So what you contributed is never taxed. It's the growth that would be taxed if you used it incorrectly. If it's owned by, say, so normally what would happen, like you couldn't have a friend that owned a 529 plan for your daughter or for your son, okay? It has to be a family relationship. It could be an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, that's fine. But it has to be like a blood relative is typically how it's worded. So if a grandparent owns it or an aunt or an uncle owns it, and it's there, the child is the beneficiary, and you use it to pay for school, there's no tax. There's no tax on it at all. If you use it for something other than college, well, then the growth becomes taxable, and you pay a 10% penalty on that growth as well, okay? Unless they get a scholarship. If they get a scholarship, you don't need it because of the scholarship, you still pay the tax, but you don't pay the penalty. But in a case like that, you can shift it to another family member oftentimes, okay? Any other questions? So if anybody does have any other questions, feel free to give me a call or Elena a call. Email us, whatever we'd like. I know sometimes people don't want to discuss their personal, in front of a group. That's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that at all. I'll stick around, and if anybody wants to come up and ask me any other further questions, feel free to do so. If you'd like to have a discussion about financial aid, just understand we offer a complimentary consultation to anybody. You want to have a phone conversation, Zoom. I'm out in Hauppauge. If you want to drive out there, God bless you. That's your choice to do so. It's easier for Zoom and phone, but whatever, we're around. If you just have a quick question, or even if you want to spend an hour talking about it, feel free to do so. There's no charge in doing so. Okay. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to ask. If not, thanks for coming tonight. I really do appreciate it. All right. Thank you very much, and thanks to Wantor for hosting us. It's very nice of them to do that.